Hi everybody. So what is this extremely fine English piece doing in the garden? Well, obviously that's because we're in France where English pieces are considered to look better out of the home. In fact, it's more of a question for lighting. We are operating under no such bias here with regard to English decorative art, but we do remain aware that the automatic sprinkler systems will engage in about 35 minutes. Now, this is a signed tilt-top table. Need we pause to consider where that name might have come from? And this dates to about the year 1820, 1825. And I almost missed the signature, which we will see partially stamped, as many of them are. If they're findable, they're often barely legible anymore. But this one was poorly applied, poorly struck. And it says Lope of Leamont Street for Trollope of Parliament Street. Now, this is a firm which is mainly known for their production during the mid-19th century because, well, they participated in the World's Fairs that began in 1851, and there is an 1867 signed table by them conserved in the Victoria and Albert Museum. Now, the Victoria and Albert Museum says that Trollope Sons was one of the largest and most well-known makers of furniture in London during the reign of Queen Victoria from 1837 to 1901. And so it is somewhat unusual and therefore, as far as I can tell, interesting to have a piece like this, which dates to the 1820s, which is sort of the heyday, the period for which this firm is most remembered. So although we think of this firm as belonging more to the mid-19th century, it was in fact founded by Joseph Trollope in 1778, and it would have been his son George who was at the head of the workshop when this was made in the 1820s, and it wasn't until 1843 that the firm became Trollope Sons. So there you have it, a signed piece, an early example of a famous firm's work, and I would say, just probably you would say too as well, a rather beautiful item. And in general, everybody, comments are really welcome on this particular piece because I lack the practical experience with English work to really have a thorough feel for what this is, how special it is. I can tell that it's good and rare. And one of you asked if you could get an idea for the value of some of the pieces that are featured here on the channel. And in general, when it comes to works of art like this from the past, I look for things that are beautiful in an objective sense and which have transcended a large amount of time. So for that reason, there's an element of pricelessness to them. And I mean that seriously. If you look at, you know, some of the most expensive items in our culture are works of art from the past. So there's some transcendental quality that the best works of art have that make them sort of priceless in a way. Now, in terms of the monetary value of this table that we have here sitting in the grass, Sotheby's sold one that was, albeit slightly finer, but unsigned a few years ago for $32,000. I wonder what I would do with such funds when I sell this table. Probably something pursuant to the common good and maybe a little attention-seeking as well. But anyway, you know, there is an objective market reality to the value of this outside of the fact that I have it for sale. So we've covered quite a lot of other pieces on the channel that are to the tune of this table, Charles X French pieces in maple with fine inlay of amaranth wood. And that is what makes this piece, you know, essentially a Charles X equivalent. Although it's English, we would call this George IV. But it falls under the Regency style, the long-lived and famous English Regency style, which was named for George when he was Prince George as he reigned as the regent from 1811 to 1820 in the place of George III, who was too mentally ill to rule. And so this robust neoclassical style that sort of dominates really the first half of the 19th century all throughout Europe in a way, it emerges in England in the late 18th century, and then it develops. And it takes its name from the literal political regency between 1811 and 1820, but it develops and it becomes more exotic and more exuberant as the decades unfold. But we can really see the English Regency period as something that begins in the late 1790s and sort of doesn't really officially end until about 1840. And so we say this is George IV specifically because it's referring to this maple, also you'll see them in rosewood, fine furniture with fine inlay. That's where most of the decor is coming from here, as opposed to gilded bronze or some other material. George IV would therefore, I believe, be referring to a specific facet of Regency, which might hone us in more on this type of fine inlaid furniture made in the 1820s. I say that with quite a lot of trepidation because, as I said, this is only the third English piece that I have owned in my life, and I've read 300 books about French furniture, and I've skimmed one about English stuff. So, but regardless of that, I think we can agree that the table is worth taking a look at. And one of the things that I like about it, other than the signature, is that it has clearly retained its original metalwork. If we come around back, we can see this wonderful hefty brass latch that still functions wonderfully. There's a very reassuring click when it comes down. But of course this falls into the repertoire of neoclassical furniture that's imitating antique furniture of thousands of years ago, the forms of ancient Rome, the grand bygone republics. And so we see these robust claw feet, some palmettes that seem to be deploying from a scroll or a little lotus flower there. Of course the lotus flower baluster that is supporting this wonderful table, and then it is bordered with a scrolling frieze of acanthus leaves and foliage. Typical neoclassical pattern. So we might as well just pan over that and take a look at the beautiful craftsmanship. Obviously they went to the trouble of using two different types of wood here to give us a nice two-tone effect. As we pan over the piece, we might notice a couple of little replaced bits of veneer, bits of inlay that might have been replaced during the last restoration, but I mean, what do you expect? It's 200 years old. Obviously, there's going to be a few things missing. It's just great to see that, you know, essentially the restoration work done on this was a revarnishing, which just really allows us to see the inherent beauty of this piece. There does not appear to be any other deeper restorations or, you know, concealments of major breakages, anything like that. The neighbors are illegally building a pool, so they have some jackhammers going on over there. But anyway, what I wanted to kind of mention as well is I'm not so sure that this tilt feature was ever very functional. It could have been a very dynamic and interesting selling point. And of course, it allows this table to have a really stunning decorative effect when not in use. And it does allow you theoretically to store the piece out of the way and then bring in this table when you might need it. Somebody might imagine pieces like this in such extravagant large homes that you'd say, well, how in God's name would you possibly need another table? Well, if you had a large city apartment with a dining room that could only seat 20 people, maybe once every 3 or 4 months you'd end up with 24. And so you could pull this out from an adjacent salon or the music room where it was looking pretty, slide it over into the dining room and make a table and have a place for 4 or 5 extra people. That being said, I sort of have a feeling that these would have been stationary entryway tables, maybe left like this all of the time. And in the last 5 minutes, we have operated the tilt feature more than it has ever been operated in 200 years. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just have a feeling that the tilt feature makes it dynamic and interesting, but that many people would have used this as a sort of entryway or maybe library table, and it would have stayed like this its entire life. That being said, if you pull the latch and you take a look at it vertical, perhaps that would be worth more than its practical use as a table even. As usual, I wanted to thank all of you for watching this video about furniture from the past, of all things, which I hope will preserve this piece online, as usual, but which should also help some people who are new to this subject understand what types of it are most valuable and why, sort of the difference between pre-industrial works of decorative art and then everything else that we ambiguously qualify as an antique, generally factory-made copies of things like this. And then for those of you who know far more than I do, I hope that you'll enjoy having access to these pieces. And if you'd like to support the endeavor of creating an online period furniture library of the most compelling pieces that I encounter, please subscribe to the channel. It would be most appreciated. Thank you. Damn thing was heavy.